The afternoon was descending upon the arid hills of northern Israel. The wind blew hot, kicking up dust devils that danced across the cracked earth. The trees stood like lifeless skeletons, and the scent of dry soil permeated the air. For years, not a drop of rain had fallen. The clouds fled as if fearful of crossing that hardened sky. The people walked with heads bowed, their eyes sunken, their lips chapped, their hearts weary from waiting. Israel bore the weight of God's silence, and amidst that desolation, the echo of idolatry grew. Baal, the storm god, was now the name most frequently uttered in the marketplaces and palaces. But far from the throngs, in a forgotten valley, a man strode with resolute steps and a gaze that seemed to pierce through time. Elijah, the prophet of the living God, knew the wilderness was not punishment, it was preparation. The wind whispered secrets amongst the stones, and he heard the voice the world had long since ignored. "Return, Elijah, the time has come." Those words ignited within him something that not even years of drought could extinguish. He rose, cloaked in his worn mantle, and set off towards the palace of King Ahab. As the populace prostrated themselves before stone idols, Elijah bore the weight of the most perilous undertaking of his life, confronting the deceit that had ensnared Israel. His voice would be the thunder preceding the tempest, and his challenge, the spark that ignited a miracle the world would forever commemorate. The palace of Samaria was the epitome of decadence: dry fountains, withered gardens, and altars laden with ashes before the effigy of Baal. King Ahab, weary and restless, gazed at the distant clouds as one who awaits the impossible. It was then that a servant burst in, announcing, "The prophet Elijah is here." The king rose, incensed, and the air seemed to thicken as the prophet entered. Elijah was undeterred. His eyes blazed like embers, and his resolute voice cleaved the silence. "You are the one who troubles Israel, Ahab, for you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord and followed Baal. But today the Lord will answer." Elias proposed something unprecedented, a confrontation on Mount Carmel. It would not be a debate of words, but a duel of power. "Gather the people and also the prophets of Baal. Let each prepare their sacrifice. The God who answers with fire, he shall be the true one." Elias's audacity echoed through the palace halls. Jezebel scoffed, the priests laughed, but the challenge was accepted. On the appointed day, Mount Carmel became a battleground of faith and doubt. Thousands ascended to bear witness. On one side, the prophets of Baal, adorned in opulent attire with coal-lined eyes. On the other, a solitary man clad in humble raiment, possessing an unshakable conviction. The contrast was stark, earthly power arrayed against divine faith. Elias gazed upon the people and declared, "How long will you waver between two paths? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, follow him." The ensuing silence was suffocating. Not a sound, not a murmur. It was as if the very heavens awaited the first move. You know, sometimes our lives reach that point of choice as well, between what is true and what merely seems right. And I want to invite you to journey with me to the end of this story. If this message is resonating with your heart, brace yourself, because what follows will stir you. Take this opportunity and subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss the subsequent chapters of this journey. And tell me here in the comments, what has been your Mount Carmel, that place where you need to see God answer? I'm eager to read your story. The sun was already high in the sky, its rays searing, scorching the earth and making the air stifling. It was at this hour that the prophets of Baal commenced their ritual, attempting to invoke the power of the deity to whom they paid homage. The scene was a tableau of fervent devotion intertwined with utter despair. The prophets chanted with loud, strident voices, dancing frenetically, their feet striking the ground with forceful percussions, while drums and other instruments reverberated through the air. The atmosphere was thick with sound and motion. They whirled around the altar as if in a ritualistic trance, endeavoring to capture the attention of Baal, their storm god, convinced that the vigor of their dance and the clamor of their voices could elicit a response. Their words were repetitive and anxious, echoing across the mount. "Baal, hear us!" The fervent invocation stretched on, but time elapsed, and the silence remained unbroken. The day's oppressive heat made the ground tremble beneath the prophets' feet, yet the heavens offered no reply. Elias, in stark contrast to the surrounding commotion, observed everything with a tranquil demeanor, his countenance unperturbed, betraying no hint of disquiet. He exhibited no haste nor the restless agitation that gripped the populace. The prophet, in his profound wisdom and unwavering faith in the divine, understood that time was not an adversary. He perceived the endeavors of the prophets of Baal as utterly futile, a fervent appeal to a deity conspicuously absent. The crowd, initially captivated, began to exhibit signs of unease. The lengthening shadows cast by the trees encircling the mount served as a stark marker of the passage of time, and a pervasive sense of doubt began to permeate the throng. The ritual of the prophets persisted, yet with each succeeding moment, their desperation seemed to intensify. Sweat beaded on their brows, and fatigue etched itself onto their visages. Upon realizing the utter futility of their invocations, despair descended upon their hearts. At the zenith of their exasperation, the prophets commenced to lacerate themselves with sharp blades. Blood cascaded upon the altar stones, imbuing the earth with a sorrowful symbolism of capitulation. They harbored the conviction that corporeal suffering might appease Baal, yet notwithstanding, the silence endured. Their entreaties grew increasingly desperate, more anguished, but no divine response emanated from the heavens. The deity they invoked appeared remote, absent, perhaps ensconced elsewhere, lost in contemplation, or simply non-existent. The priest's despair was palpable, akin to a silent, unheard cry, a supplication met with utter void. The populace, observing these proceedings with mounting unease, began to apprehend that no power resided within this god. The assurance that Baal would bestow rain or deliver answers to the people was dissipating, and naught transpired. It was then that Elijah, with his composed demeanor and unwavering confidence, approached the prophets of Baal. He was unlike them, who surrendered to despair and affliction. Elijah, with a quiet irony and a faith that shone through his words, addressed the prophets with a subtle taunt. "Shout louder. Perhaps he is thinking, or perhaps sleeping." The crowd, witnessing the prophet's boldness, could not contain their laughter. Some began to chuckle along with him, while others still failed to grasp what was transpiring. But the irony was not well received by the prophets of Baal. Their frustration morphed into rage, and they, more incensed than ever, intensified the volume of their cries and the gestures of their dance. The desperation escalated, and the ritual, which had previously seemed an attempt to invoke power, now devolved into a spectacle of unheeded fury. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, suffusing the sky with hues of gold and orange, night drew near. The day's heat yielded to a coolness that offered the throng a palpable sense of relief. Yet a profound silence still held sway over the mount. There was no fire, no response from Baal. Those hours of fervent cries and frenzied dances had proven utterly in vain. The storm god, reputed to be mighty, remained mute. He did not answer the supplications of his devotees, nor did he bring fire or any sign. In that moment, the deity who had promised dominion and mastery over the elements had failed to manifest any sign of life or presence. The silence that enveloped the mount was not merely a lull in the ritual, but an acknowledgement that the true God, whom Elijah served, was poised to issue his own pronouncement. While the prophets of Baal stood exhausted and without answers, the God of Israel was orchestrating his formidable reply, and none would thenceforth question his sovereignty. As the day began to recede, the sky's hues already heralded the imminent arrival of night. The sun's warmth gradually waned, and the air started to acquire a cooler edge, yet an almost tangible tension permeated the atmosphere, signaling that something extraordinary was on the cusp of unfolding. Elias, amidst the silently observing throng, rose with resolute composure, as if acutely aware of his prescribed course of action. The populace, having borne witness to the confrontation between the prophets of Baal and Elias, sensed the shift in the ambient mood, the weight of anticipation poised to be shattered. A premonition that the impossible was about to materialize began to grip them all. The prophet, with measured strides, advanced towards the remnants of a forgotten altar. It was an altar once consecrated to the worship of the true God, but over time it had fallen into disrepair and neglect, as if the people themselves had forsaken their faith. Yet there, before that desolation, Elias discovered the enduring emblem of a promise. With steady hands and a heart brimming with faith, Elijah commenced the reconstruction of the altar, stone by stone, each movement an act of restoration and a silent prayer for the people who stood lost. Each stone he placed upon the altar symbolized a tribe of Israel, each bearing its unique narratives, its transgressions, its struggles, and its aspirations. This was a fractured nation, a people sundered by deceit, idolatry, and a profound lack of faith. Yet, Elijah understood that for the populace to find reconciliation with God, it was imperative to restore that which had been lost. The resounding clatter of stones striking one another echoed through the mountains, and to Elijah this sound was akin to the thrumming of a heart that, though wounded and estranged, still possessed life, still held the potential for healing. Each percussive beat was an augury, a signal that a profound transformation was imminent. After completing the reconstruction of the altar, Elijah meticulously prepared the site for the sacrifice. He arranged the wood, positioned the offering, and, with a resolute gaze, commanded that pitchers of water be brought. It was not a meager amount, but a quantity substantial enough to thoroughly drench the altar and the offering. 1, 2, 3 pitchers of water were poured upon the altar. The water began to pool around the stones, and the sacrifice, so carefully readied, was now utterly saturated. The people, in profound silence, observed the scene with bewilderment. No one comprehended what was transpiring. It was inconceivable that fire could ignite such a sodden offering. They were well versed in the laws of nature and understood that there was no conceivable way fire could consume something so thoroughly saturated with water. However, Elijah was unconcerned with the laws of physics or human logic. He placed his faith not in the improbable, but in the impossible. He knew that the God he served was not bound by human limitations or naturalistic explanations. The impossible was merely an occasion for God to manifest his power. The crowd watched in hushed silence, uncertain of what to anticipate, as Elias, with an uncommon serenity, raised his gaze to the heavens. The surrounding quietude was absolute, as if even the wind had stilled to bear witness to the impending event. The prophet drew a deep breath, as though preparing to commune with God himself. Then, with a voice firm and imbued with authority, he declared, "Lord, God of Israel, show today that you are the sole God, and may this people turn their hearts back to you." His words were not merely a prayer, but a profound cry, a plea for the restoration of a lost people, an invocation for the manifestation of divine power. Elias was not asking for something small or trivial. He implored the Lord to display his grandeur so clearly and indisputably that the heart of every Israelite would be transformed, that they would return to the true God and forsake their false idols. That moment was more than a mere sacrifice. It was a summons to restoration, to true worship, and to reconciliation with the God who had chosen them. The wind had subsided, and a mysterious calm settled over the land. The world seemed suspended, as if time itself had come to a standstill. A profound silence enveloped everything, a silence that echoed like the breath of something immense about to occur. Then, without any prelude or sign, the sky suddenly tore open like a wound of light, rending the darkness with unearthly intensity. A bolt of fire descended from on high, cleaving the stillness like a flaming sword, and struck with force upon the altar Elias had prepared. The flash was so potent, so dazzling, that the entire mountain, with its rocks and trees, blazed as if forged from molten gold, reflecting the luminescence of celestial glory. The fire not only consumed the offering and the firewood, but also the stones that supported the altar, and even the water that had been poured upon it as a final act of defiance. The impossible unfolded before a stunned multitude. There was no explanation for what they were witnessing. The fire not only incinerated everything, but it seemed to purify, devour, and transform every element present. The earth trembled, and the heavens were filled with the palpable sense that God Himself had touched that place. The people, in a gesture of profound reverence and utter surrender, fell prostrate, their bodies bowed in humility. They could not contain the outcry that erupted from their hearts. "The Lord is God! The Lord is God!" Their voices reverberated across the mountain, mingling with the tears streaming down their faces, now bathed in the dust of the earth and the divine presence. With his countenance aglow from the inferno and his heart brimming with unwavering faith, Elias lifted his hands toward the heavens. Every etched line on his visage seemed to mirror the profound intensity of the moment. He whispered, his soul suffused with an unshakable confidence and fervent hope, "Now, O Lord, restore your covenant." Elias's supplication acted as a veritable key, unlocking the very gates of heaven, and in that precise instant, something miraculous transpired. The sky, as if in resonant response to the fervent plea and the preceding sacrifice, transmuted the fire into a harbinger of promise. Clouds began to coalesce languidly on the horizon, gradually suffusing the formerly desolate expanse with a shade of profound umber. After an interminable epoch of unyielding drought, the parched earth, at long last, began to draw breath once more. The rain, the long-awaited precipitation, was drawing nigh, bearing with it the very essence of renewal, the effervescent hope and the profound restoration that the populace so desperately craved. The fire that had descended from the firmament was not merely a spectacular manifestation of divine power, but an unmistakable signifier that the Almighty was poised to fulfill His sacred covenant and usher in a revitalized existence for that beleaguered populace. As the day wore on, clouds began to gather on the horizon, accumulating with an arresting intensity. The wind, previously tranquil, started to rise like a distant roar, as if the earth itself were bracing for something momentous. It was the sound of nature responding to what was imminent. The sky, once clear and serene, now began to be veiled by a thick layer of dark clouds, threatening to usher in something far beyond a mere shift in the weather. Elias, his heart overflowing with faith, knelt then and there in the midst of the desert's vast expanse and began to pray with fervent devotion. His plea was simple, yet imbued with power. He asked for rain, the rain that would bring life, restoration, and renewal to a parched land scarred by drought. With unwavering conviction, Elias dispatched his servant toward the horizon, instructing him to scan the heavens for the nascent harbinger of approaching rain. The servant departed, traversing the parched terrain and meticulously surveying the sky, only to return empty-handed on 6 successive occasions, bearing naught but the report that no alteration had transpired. The earth remained desiccated, the firmament obstinately overcast, and the desert stretched out in seemingly endless monotony. Yet Elias did not succumb to despair. With each negative pronouncement, his faith only intensified. He understood that even though God's promise appeared remote, genuine faith would remain unyielding in the face of adversity. He persevered, confident that what God had pledged, he would undoubtedly fulfill. On the seventh occasion, as the servant returned, his voice was quivering, tinged with disbelief and astonishment. "There is a small cloud, no larger than a man's hand." It was a minuscule sign, yet profoundly momentous. The cloud, unremarkable in its dimensions, served as an harbinger of what was to transpire. In an instant, the sky, which had hitherto been unblemished, underwent a radical transformation. The clouds coalesced and darkened with alarming celerity, as if the cosmos itself were poised to unleash its fury. The wind escalated, and the initial rumblings of thunder began to reverberate across the land, akin to an overture for nature's grand spectacle. The sound of thunder echoed through the heavens, heralding the imminent deluge. And then, as if in direct response to Elijah's supplication, the rain finally descended. The water fell with an overwhelming might, heavy and relentless, cleansing the parched earth, the accumulated dust, and even the anguish and culpability that had taken root within the hearts of the people. The populace, who until then had observed the scene with a mixture of skepticism and hope, now surrendered themselves to this divine blessing. They danced in the rain, as if experiencing a rebirth. The sound of laughter and cries of joy mingled with the downpour, forming a melody of celebration and gratitude. The tears, which had previously been signs of anguish and pain, now commingled with the rain, becoming tears of liberation, healing, and renewal. The fire that had consumed the altar now transformed into a symbol of purification, and the rain falling upon them became the emblem of divine restoration. The earth, which had been parched and lifeless, was now being invigorated. The seeds that had been buried in the dry ground began to find space to grow and blossom. The rain was not merely a climatic shift, but an act of redemption, proof that God had heard the cry of his people and was now bringing life back to that forgotten place. With his face bathed in the gentle light of the rain, Elias lifted his gaze to the heavens and whispered, his voice imbued with reverence and understanding, "The desert is never the end. It is the beginning of the promise." He understood that this moment was not merely a transient respite, but the genesis of something far grander. The desert, that desolate and barren expanse, was not the people's ultimate destination, but rather a crucible, a necessary stage for them to apprehend the true magnitude of God's power. God's promise transcended the immediate circumstances they perceived, reaching far beyond the horizon of their sight. The desert was but the initial phase of their pilgrimage, a crucible in which their faith would be refined and where ultimately God's covenant would be fulfilled. The rain was not simply an act of divine clemency, but a profound affirmation that God's covenant with his people would remain immutable. And so, as the raindrops continued their descent, the land and the hearts of the people swelled with renewed hope. For the God who had once responded with fire had now touched them with his grace and his restorative power. After the torrential downpour that cleansed the land, Mount Carmel fell into a profound silence. The echoes of thunder still reverberated through the mountains, albeit now in a softer cadence, akin to a distant whisper. The waters that had fallen so heavily now coursed through the fissures of the valleys, carving their path over the rocks, while the wind, having abated, brought a respite that seemed to purify not only the earth but also the hearts of those present. The struggle had concluded, but what followed was a deep stillness, as if the mountain itself were absorbing the gravity of all that had transpired. The clamor of the invocations from the prophets of Baal, the sounds of their frenzied rituals, and the tension of the spiritual battle dissipated, yielding to the tranquility of the post-storm aftermath. The altar, once ablaze and caked with dust, now lay wet and renewed by the water that had descended from the heavens. Yet that silence, though comforting, also bore a palpable weight. Elias, his feet planted firmly on the sodden earth, departed with a heavy yet grateful heart. He knew that God's fire had answered, consuming the offering and the altar and eradicating the idols that had proliferated among the people. The divine sign was unmistakable, and the victory over Baal had been decisively secured. Nevertheless, the prophet understood that while the fire had won the visible skirmish, the spiritual warfare was far from concluded. Jezebel, the formidable idolatrous queen, would not capitulate readily. She still wielded considerable power and influence over a significant portion of Israel, and her wrath toward Elias, who had publicly shamed her prophets, would be unbridled. Elias sensed the palpable tension of the impending conflict, a struggle against spiritual forces that would not be vanquished by a mere display of fire. The divine conflagration had consumed the altar, but the true battle against iniquity would demand more than a singular, albeit powerful moment. It would necessitate steadfast perseverance, unwavering courage, and an unshakable faith in the Lord. However, something within Elijah had profoundly shifted. He was no longer merely the man who had challenged the prophets of Baal on the mountain, nor the prophet who cried out for a sign of fire. God's fire, so potent and immense, had touched his soul in a way he was only beginning to comprehend. He realized that God's fire is not solely for the annihilation of evil, but for the rekindling of what has been extinguished. This fire was not merely an instrument of judgment, but also of renewal. The fire that consumed the sacrifice and the altar stones also reignited the faith that had dwindled in the hearts of the people of Israel. He knew that God's work would not be confined to the demolition of idols, but to the restoration of true worship, to the renewal of the covenant between God and his people. The battle had been but the initial step. What followed would be even more significant. As he walked beneath the relentless downpour, Elias felt the weight of responsibility, yet also the buoyancy of renewed hope. He knew that this rain, which had been an answer to prayer, was merely the harbinger of something momentous. It was not just a sign of succor for the parched earth, but a symbol of a new epoch for the people of Israel. The faith, which had flickered out amidst years of idolatry and apostasy, was now being reignited. The covenant with the Lord had not been sundered, merely dormant. God's work was being restored, and the people long ensnared by spiritual darkness now had the opportunity to return to the path of truth. Elias understood that, even though the signs of victory were evident and God's presence was undeniable, the task of restoration would be protracted and arduous. The people of Israel needed to repent and turn their hearts back to God. Yet Elias also knew that the Lord had already taken the initial step and that the work was underway. The rain not only moistened the parched earth, but also carried with it the promise of a different future, of spiritual rebirth. Israel's faith, which had seemed extinguished, was now re-emerging, fueled by the divine fire and the water of grace. God's glory had been revealed, and life was returning to the desert. The Lord's name would be remembered again, not merely as the God who answered with fire, but as the God who brings life, who restores the lost and reignites the flame of faith. Elias, with a lighter heart, walked on, knowing his mission was far from over, but that this moment of purification, this moment of fire and rain, had heralded the dawn of something new for the people of Israel. The God who responded to their cry with fire was now paving the way for renewal, and Elias understood that the path ahead, though arduous, would be one of profound hope. Mount Carmel, that stage of profound spiritual intensity, has been indelibly etched into the annals of history as a place where heaven and earth converged, where the manifestation of God's power was evident and irrefutable. Yet far more than a historical landmark, that mountain has become an eternal symbol of divine intervention, a perpetual reminder that the fire of God is not extinguished by the passage of time, but continues to blaze within the hearts of the faithful. The flame from that momentous day, the very fire that consumed the sacrifice and unveiled the true nature of the Lord, was not dissipated by the subsequent winds or rains. It persists, eternally alive, fueled by the unwavering faith of believers, of those who, like Elijah, choose to place their trust in God, even amidst the direst adversities. The fire that illuminated that altar still burns brightly in the souls of those who earnestly seek the Lord's presence, and who, notwithstanding life's tempests, steadfastly believe in the transformative might of His grace. Today, the God who responded with fire on Mount Carmel remains the same God who acts in our lives. He no longer responds with visible lightning that illuminates the heavens, but with an internal fire that burns in the heart of each one who perseveres, who keeps the flame of faith alight, even in the most challenging circumstances. This fire is not a physical flame, but a spiritual presence that warms the soul, illuminates our paths, and when we feel weak, imbues us with the strength to carry on. It is the fire of the Holy Spirit, which transforms us, renews us, and propels us to live in accordance with God's purpose for us. This fire does not require a grand, visible manifestation to be real. It burns silently in the hearts of all who, through faith, present themselves before God and seek Him with sincerity. If you've come this far and this story has touched your heart, I want to tell you something. The same God who ignited that altar on Mount Carmel can rekindle your heart. It doesn't matter how extinguished, weak, or distant it may seem. God has the power to reignite the flame of faith that exists within you. He can restore what is broken, renew what has grown cold, and bring a new passion for Him into your life. The God who acted so powerfully in the distant past is the same one who acts in the present, ready to do something new in you. If you feel your faith is burning low, or that life's difficulties have extinguished the passion you once had, know that God is willing to reignite that flame. He desires you to live with courage, with the confidence that He is with you, guiding your steps and empowering you to fulfill the plans He has for your life. If this message has resonated with your soul, do not hesitate. Subscribe to the channel here. Join us and embark on a journey of faith, knowing that together we can confront life's challenges and experience the transformative power of God. This community is a haven of genuine faith, where we not only impart teachings, but also walk side by side, bolstering one another on our path of metamorphosis. Here we don't merely speak of God, but endeavor to embody His word in our lives, and collectively we witness the tangible and concrete efficacy of His presence. I invite you to share your story in the comments. What have you learned from the life of Elijah? What has most impacted you in your faith journey? Have you ever experienced a moment when you felt God answer in an unexpected way, much like Elijah saw fire descend from heaven? Perhaps your experience could be the key for someone else who is struggling to find the hope they need today. Do not underestimate the power of your testimony. It can be the inspiration someone needs to persevere. Together we can be a light for one another, bringing hope and renewal to those seeking answers. God's flame is inextinguishable, and its echo resonates within each of us, keeping alive the promise that He is with us always, because the fire that fell from the heavens that day still burns in the narratives of those who choose to believe.